Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Gopi Channa Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Channa Gopi Channa Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Gopi Channa Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Gopi Channa Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Channa Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Gopi Channa Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Channa Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Jaya Radham Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radham Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jai Nisla Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asto Tarasata Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace of High Charana Ravinda Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Foundry Charya Save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asto Tarasata Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Premja Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sivsari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gogobinath Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Brajbhumi Shivandama Ki Navadvip Mayapur Dama Ki Purushtam Chatra Jaripuri Dama Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samavekta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitai Gopremanandi. All glories to some glories. All glories to some glories. All glories to some glories. All glories, Lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Happy Nityananda Trayodasi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vidunvata. What's on the board? Yep. Vedamayang Nijang Vapur Vidunvata Vedamayam Nijam Vapur Vidunvata Vedamayam Nijam Vapur Janas Tapa Satya Nivasino Vayam Janastapa Satya Nivasino Vayam Janastapa Satya Nivasino Vayam Vidunvata Vedamayam Nijam Vapu Chanastapa Satya Nivasino Vayam Sata Sikodhuta Shivambu Bindubir Satashikodhuta Shivambu Bindubir Satashikodhuta Shivambu Bindubir Vimrijyamana Brisham Isha Pavita Vimrijyamana Brisham Isha Pavita Vimrijyamana Brisham Isha Pavita Satashikodhuta Shivambu Bindubir Vrijyamana brisham ishapavitaha Vidunvata vedamayang nijang vapur Janastapa satya nivashino vayam Satashiko duta shivambu bindubir Vimrijyamana brishamisha pavitaha Vidunvata vedamayam nijam vapur Janastapa satya nivashino vayam Satashiko duta shivambu bindubi Vimrijyamana brishamisha pavitaha Vaishnavis. Vidunvata, while shaking, Vedamayam, personified Vedas, Nijam, own, Vapu, body, Jana, the Janaloka planetary system, Tapa, the Tapaloka planetary system, Satya, the Satya Loka planetary system, Nivasina, the inhabitants, Vayam, we, Sata, hairs on the shoulder, Shika Udhuta, sustained by the tip of the hair, Shiva, auspicious, Ambu, water, Bindubhir, by the particles, Vimrijamana, we are thus sprinkled by, Brisham, highly, Isha, O Supreme Lord, Pavitaha, purified. Translation. The Supreme Lord, O Supreme Lord, undoubtedly we are inhabitants of the most pious planets, the Jana, Tapas and Satyalokas, but still we have been purified by the drops of water sprinkled from your shoulder hairs by the shaking of your body. Responsively, O Supreme Lord, Undoubtedly, we are inhabitants of the most pious planets. The Jana, Tapas and Satyalokas. But still we have been purified by the drops of water sprinkled from your shoulder hairs, by the shaking of your body. Purport. Ordinarily, the body of a hog is considered impure, but one should not consider that the hog incarnation assumed by the Lord is also impure. That form of the Lord is the personified Vedas and is transcendental. The inhabitants of the Jana, Tapas and Satyalokas are the most pious persons in the material world, but because those planets are situated in the material world, there are so many material impurities there also. Therefore, when the drops of water from the tips of the Lord's shoulder hairs were sprinkled upon the bodies of the inhabitants of the higher planets, they felt purified. The Ganges water is pure because of its emanating from the toe of the Lord, and there is no difference between the water emanating from the toe and that from the tips of the hair on the shoulder of Lord Ball. They are both absolute and transcendental. So this is an interesting discussion here. And we see often in the Lord's pastimes that he does things that are bewildering to the atheists. And there's a nice verse in the Gita where he says, Naham prakashya sabasa yogamaya samavrita mudo yang nabijanati. I forgot the last line. But basically what he's explaining there is that he doesn't reveal himself to the atheists, and they're actually bewildered by his activities. And also here we can see that an atheist or a non-devotee would look at this and say, how can God come as a pig? You know, this is like the lowest of all animals. How can the highest person come as a pig? Because they have a material concept. They're seeing that, because my body, is, whatever. That they, what's that verse? There's a line that Prabhupada would often use. Atmavan manate jagat. Yeah? As I see it, that's the way the world is. Or as I experience it, that's the way the world is. Basically, they perceive everything through their own filter. It's just like when I was a child, there was a song here in Australia called "Rose-Colored Glasses," and if you're wearing rose-colored glasses, then everything just looks very rosy, because of the filter. And this is what's going on for everyone in this world, is because they have a particular filter covering the soul, which is made of the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And it's combined in so many different combinations and permutations to add up to 8,400,000 species of life. And according to the filter that is over the spirit soul that's inside the body, then they perceive the material universe. And they perceive everything in the material universe. Just like, for instance, we might look at a living entity that's in a dog body. So it's going to perceive things in this material world in a particular way, based on that filter. And we don't have to get into too much of the descriptions of the things dogs do, because they're pretty unclean living entities. But because of the filter of the body, they see everything in a particular way. They see a lamppost, and that's a lamppost has a particular purpose for them. Or they see a lady dog, or the backside of another dog. You know what I mean? We don't have to get too much into the description of it, but we can see every time they see something, a particular thing, they have a particular response to that, which is because of the filter that's covering their body. So in the same way, we all have these filters, and we respond to external stimuli in a particular way based on that filter. But as we become more and more purified, the way we respond to that external stimuli changes. The way we perceive things changes. If someone's a greedy person, they're going to see every situation in this material world. How can I profit from this? How can I, make money out of this situation? Or if someone's a lusty person, when they see a member of the opposite sex, then automatically they're thinking, how can I enjoy this situation? How can I exploit this person for my sense gratification? But as one becomes purified, then you perceive things in a different way. You start to understand the nature of things in this world. But Krishna, he descends in so many different forms, and he sometimes, even when he departs, just like we see when the story is there in the last canto of the Bhagavatam, that when he departed this world, he left what is called a Maya form to bewilder the atheist, because obviously we understand that Krishna has no material form. He's above the modes of material nature. He has a fully transcendental form, and as we see in the Brahma Samhita, says Angani Yasha Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pashanti Panti Kalayanti Chiram Jaganti. Basically explaining there that all the senses of the Lord, are interchangeable. One sense can do the function, for us, if we want to eat, there's only one way we can eat. You can't start, shoving pakoras in your ear. It's not going to work. You might wind up with an ear infection as a result. But for Krishna, it doesn't matter. Whether he hears the mantra, he eats. He sees the food, he eats. He's not limited like us. All his senses are interchangeable. So it's fully transcendental body. So, and also the point is made here is because there's the description of when the Lord manifested as Vamanadev, and then Bali Maharaj, he asked Bali Maharaj for I think it was 3 steps of land. And we understand, with the first 2 steps, he took the whole universe. And he said, the first step he took the whole universe. The second step, was it when the first step? I think when he's reached out, and he poked a hole through the covering layers of the universe, and the Ganges came through. And it's said that the water from the Ganga, because it touched his toes as he broke the covering of the universe, then the Ganges is considered very, very pure. Actually transcendental. We become purified, completely purified of our sins by bathing in the Ganges. So, but the point made here is that, because he's absolute, whether the water is coming from his toe, whether it's coming from his hairs of his body, whatever, it doesn't matter, because of his absolute nature. So, the point I was making then was that when the materialist sees a form like a hog, they think, oh, this is most abominable. This is the horrible form. And even for those who have been to Brudge, when you see a group of hogs sort of walking together, you don't go over and pat them or anything like it. You sort of make a wide berth around them, because they're really, some of the things the hogs do is just extraordinary. Has anyone ever been there when they're cleaning out the drains in Vrindavan? Man, what a smell. What a smell. It's just the worst smell you could ever imagine. But you see the hogs, they'll just lie in the drains all day long, just, sleep and have a cup. It's really, they're in bliss, they love it. I remember one time I was there at, down near Loy Bazaar, actually. And there was a mother with her child. The child was only about this big. And the child was squatting down to pass stool, and mother's holding its hand. And the stool comes out, and then the hog comes over and pushes the baby out of the way and starts eating it. This is like a hog. So whenever we see a hog, we just generally sort of give it a wide berth, because they're really unclean animals. And and if a hog were to sort of be lying in the gutter, then get out and shake itself, you wouldn't stand around and let all that stuff go on you, would you? But here we see these residents of Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka. And Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka, they're described in the Gita as these are actually in the mode of goodness. Every other planet in the material universe is either passion or ignorance. All the planets of the Devatas are in the mode of passion. But these 3 planets, because this is where the sages go, and when the universe is, when the Lord's winding up the universe, and the different jivas in the universe, especially the elevated jivas, they go up to the higher planets, and they go to these planets. Because my understanding is, when there's a partial annihilation, these 3 planets don't get annihilated. when there's a full annihilation, they all get annihilated. So the elevated persons, they go to these different planets, the Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka. And these persons are very much in the mode of goodness. And that's another interesting point that comes, because from this pastime here, is we see that because they're in the mode of goodness, then the false ego is less. Like generally, people in the mode of passion, especially people in the mode of ignorance, very, very strong false ego. Very strong false ego. Actually, the whole experience you have of those persons is the false ego. They don't actually understand themselves. So, we see, people in the mode of goodness, the false ego is greatly reduced. I mean, there's still some element of false ego there, because if there was no false ego, it means we'd be completely pure. Therefore, we'd be situated in Vishuddha Sattva, or purified goodness, beyond the modes of mere material nature. But here they are, they're situated in goodness, yet they're considering themselves to be not very elevated. They're considering themselves to be, lesser caliber of person, and they're saying that we're so fortunate because you sprinkle, you shake your body, and the this water from the Garbhodak ocean is coming off and going on our bodies, and we become purified by that. So there's quite a bit of humility there, but also not just humility, because as we know, described in the last section of the Gita, chapters 14, 16, 18. It talks about the modes of material nature and the effects of the modes of material nature, and one of the prominent effects of the mode of goodness is, anyone can think of the most prominent effect of the mode of goodness? Cleanliness is a good one, yeah, but there's others as well. Happiness is definitely there. Knowledge, illumination, yeah. There's the thing, illumination, because when one's in the mode of goodness, they see things as they are. So, I was just talking about how ordinarily when one looks at a hog, you think, oh, most unclean animal. And someone when for a materialistic person, when you tell someone about how the Lord manifests as a boar, they become bewildered. They think, how could God? Because they have a perception of God, and it's kind of like a very limited perception of God. Oftentimes, it's an old man sitting on a big hard seat, in a very, very remote, distant, kind of like removed place, which has got nothing to do with me. And for most people in this day and age, God has lost relevance. And it's not because of God's lost relevance, it's because their ideas are so limited and narrow as to what God is. Therefore, that's no longer relevant for them. They can't see how God is relevant to their lives or functioning in their lives. But then, the process of Krishna consciousness, through the process of Krishna consciousness, we can understand that the perception of God is much broader than our limited knowledge. And God is accessible to everyone. Krishna is accessible to everyone. Just like, I had a really interesting experience last night. I was coming back over, I'm staying with Mohit Prabhu, he's just over the road here, and I was coming down for the last arati, and I was just standing at the lights here on the other side of the road, and this lady comes over to me, and she's not many clothes on, and she starts talking and saying, how, you guys are the most tolerant community, and she's glorifying the devotees, and I said, I'm going over to the temple now, why don't you come with me? So she came over here and put on a mask, and the stuff came aside, and started dancing in front of the deities. The kirtan was going, she started dancing in front of the deities. I was sitting up the back just thinking, how merciful and approachable Krishna is. Because if you look at, the rules and regulations of deity worship, the rules and regulations of bhakti, and if we just take that perspective of it, then it again creates this distance between us and Krishna. And look at, for instance, there's that nice story in the Krishna book about the Yogic Brahmins. How Krishna sent the cowherd boys to go and ask them for something to eat. And because they were so hung up in their rules and regulations, they couldn't perceive that this, and even Krishna himself came, they couldn't perceive that the Supreme Personality of Godhead was before them. Because it was all about the rules and regulations for them. It's like this niyamagraha, they're following the rules and regulations for the sake of the rules and regulations and not for the sake of advancement in spiritual life. Whereas the wives of the Brahmins, the yogic Brahmins, when Krishna came, they realized, here's the goal of our lives. He's coming and asking, he's interacting for us in what might seem a very ordinary way. And this is the incredible nature of the process of bhakti, that even though one can come from the most unqualified background, because if you look Vedically speaking, you can't have anything to do with the process of spiritual life unless you come from the right background. You're considered too fallen. And this is one of the problems, during the times of Mahaprabhu and others, if some... I remember Prabhupada, he tells different stories. And one time he was talking, well, not one time, many times he would talk about how during this period in India's history, how the Brahmanas considered themselves to be very, very pure. And that if anyone, if a lower person even touched their shadow, that was considered to be very, very, improper. And Prabhupada was talking about, in one class I heard, he was talking about how, for a Sudra, when a Sudra was going down the street, he'd have to call out, I am a Sudra walking down the street, please close your doors. The society became so, in a sense, contaminated by material concepts, because it was very much about the external identifications. But that's material. It's completely material because, if we understand the nature of the soul, the eternal intrinsic nature of the soul, as Mahaprabhu points out, this is Jivera Surapahoy Krishnera Nitidas Krishnera Tatakta Shakti Beda Bed Prakash. That the eternal nature of the jiva is a servant of Krishna. It's eternal. And the thing about eternal is it can't change. If something's eternal, it cannot change. So the nature of the jiva cannot change. It may become covered by the influence of material nature, but it cannot change. The jiva is eternally a servant of Krishna. So when you see things like that, when this, and this lady, she was obviously, drugged out. She's like really glassy-eyed and stuff like that. But she's coming here in front of Radha Gopinath and dancing in front of them. So this is the connection between the jiva and the Lord. She's doing some service for Krishna. She's dancing for the pleasure of Krishna, even though she may be intoxicated, whatever. And so this goes to her eternal benefit. And it's just like I don't know if you still do Rath Yatra. You're not doing the city anymore, right? Remember when we used to do Rath Yatra in the city here, and you just see some of these people just the way they'd interact with Jagannath, they'd see Jagannath and they just become almost ecstatic. Yeah? I remember one time it was Prabhupada's 100th, the centennial. I think it was the centennial year, and Indra Maharaj was travelling in Australia at the time, and there was a padayatra going on in Australia at the time, and I remember we did this Harinam down through North Sydney. We went from the temple and we went down, I think down Walker Street and then around, where the buses go around the back there, cross over the highway, go around the back. And then we were coming up Miller Street. And we're at the traffic lights. We're actually on the roads. We had permission to sort of go down the road. And we're on the other side of the traffic lights on the highway, where Miller Street's on the other side there, near the post office. And the kirtan, the devotees were just like, just chanting, but they weren't really sort of, putting their heart into it. So Indra Maharaj started to sort of, he stopped the kirtan, he was preaching to the devotees while waiting for the lights to change. And he was just, why don't you smile and, be happy you're in the kirtan. And then, so, the mood of the kirtan really picked up, and then we crossed over the road and we started to go up the hill. And this girls' grammar school or whatever it is here, I can't remember what it is, but as we're approaching that, this whole bunch of girls from the grammar school, maybe about 50 or 60 girls, came across the road and they started to jump and dance in the kirtan and chant the holy names. And you can see, how if we are enthusiastically presenting Krishna consciousness, it touches something within the heart of the jiva. Even if it's only for a moment, it reawakens their connection with Krishna. And once that connection's been reawoken, it's an eternal thing. They can't lose it. They don't lose it unless, of course, they commit offenses. But we can see how this eternal nature of the jiva, it bursts through sometimes. It bursts through the covering, and then due to their activities, it becomes covered over again. But it's there, and it's just a matter of trying to touch it. Trying to help them, become freed from the modes of material nature. And that's why, the opportunity for the different jivas to come into contact with Krishna is so valuable and so important that, this is why Prabhupada encouraged us to be very active in our preaching efforts and to help the living entities to come into contact with the transcendental process. So, I don't really have much more to say about this. It's an interesting verse, and it's just, I do find it quite interesting how these greatly advanced personalities, because what happened here was, as I mentioned yesterday, how the boar, because what was going on is Manu was speaking to, I think it's Swayambhuva Manu, was speaking to Brahma and asking Brahma for directions what to do. Brahma told him, to populate the planet or the universe. He said, well, the earth planet's down in the water, can you get it out? And Brahma was reflecting on how to get out. But there's all the sages were there as well, all Atri, Muni, and so many different personalities were there. And then, so while he was thinking, then this boar manifested from his nostril. Tiny little boar, and then just suddenly grew up big. And then what was going on is the sages and Brahma were discussing, well, what is this? What's going on here? And it was, and actually it mentions they were arguing. There was different perceptions of what was happening. And then, after the Lord Boar roared a few times, they understood, actually this is God. And then he dove into the ocean and rescued the earth. And then he came out, after killing Hiranyaksha, and now they're glorifying him. So there's this verse and one more verse, 45, is glorifying. So it's the end of this section, and then I think there's 5 more verses to conclude the chapter, and Maitreya Rishi is basically, just giving a concluding words and offering a benediction. And then we'll see in the next section, Vidura, he asks Maitreya, well, this is really interesting, I want to know more about this, because he's told in a very, how he just he went into the water, picked up the earth, killed the demon, real shortcut form, just a real summary. But then we see that Vidura is asking, well, please, this is ecstatic. I want to know more about this, because Vidura is really, if we go back in the Bhagavatam, we see how Vidura is really, he's devastated because Krishna's left the planet, but when he's hearing about the pastimes of Krishna, he's enlivened. He's and it's the same for all of us. When we're hearing the Bhagavatam or you're reading the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and we're hearing these wonderful pastimes, we become enlivened, we become pleased, we become satisfied, happy. And so, I was actually reading this morning, there's a pastime of Mahaprabhu and Nityananda where they were hearing the story of the Sakshi Gopal deity, and they became very pleased just to hear the story. So when you hear the transcendental pastimes of Krishna, just like these sages here, they're witnessing the transcendental pastimes of Krishna, they're becoming very happy, very satisfied. So Vidura was like that he was, even though he was deeply in grief, when he was hearing because you can imagine what it's like. It's like he's a close confidant of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he knows he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then he goes, he departs. Just I met a lady here yesterday who her nephew had died recently, and she was naturally grieving, and so it's the same for Vidura. He's grieving because Krishna's departed the planet, and for one who's advanced in Krishna consciousness or advanced devotee of Krishna, this separation from Krishna is like it's more intense than losing your own life, because for one who's advanced in Krishna consciousness, they cannot conceive of being without Krishna consciousness. It's even described, Bijay Prabhu describes it in one place, how as you're advancing in Krishna consciousness, to hear and chant about the glories of the Lord, it's more important to you than breathing. It's just like, if you to stop breathing, it has obvious effects. So when one's advancing Krishna consciousness, the notion of not being able to hear and chant about Krishna is worse than giving up your life. So this is what it was like in Vidura. So that Krishna's not there, Krishna's gone. The only peace he could find, the only way he could become somewhat peaceful, was to be hearing and chanting the pastimes of the Lord. So when Maitreya Rishi sort of just touched upon this story, he's saying, "Wow, this is amazing! Please tell me more, tell me more." So then, what happens in the next chapter? He starts talking about the Kumaras, and there's a description of Vaikuntha, a very, very beautiful description of Vaikuntha. So they tell the story about how Jai and Bijay got cursed, and I was reading a few days ago that Jai and Bijay, there are only two of the gatekeepers. There's actually, I think there's 8 gates that are there, and there's 16 gatekeepers, so they're the third or fourth gate in. So the Kumaras, they got through a certain amount of gates, but when they got to Jai and Bijay, then they couldn't go any further, because Jai and Bijay say, "Well, who are you? Why are you coming in here?" And so he, then they cursed them, and anyway, you know the story. But then we find, as the description goes on, Maitreya Rishi describes how Jai and Bijay took birth, as because there's the chapter of the pregnancy of deity in the evening, which is a really interesting description. Kashyapa is talking about so many different elements of I guess culture, and the influence of the modes of nature at certain times, and how certain times in the evening. And this is why you see, like in the evening, traditionally, the Brahmanas would be engaged in chanting prayers, because it's a very inauspicious time, especially this twilight time is considered to be inauspicious. And therefore, the Brahmanas would engage in chanting prayers and performing evening duties connected to Krishna. Because as we understand that even the most inauspicious moment becomes completely auspicious if we are engaged in remembering the Lord. So this is what they do, is they remember the Lord. Anyhow, so because deity had forced Kashyapa, practically forced, because he was saying, no, I'll do my evening prayers and then I'll give you a child. And she's pulling on his dhoti, no, I want it now, So, and he kind of thought, okay, even though he knew it was wrong, he just, I have to, because she's my wife, I have to satisfy her. And so, it's talking about, the role of the husband, how the husband needs to satisfy his wife and things like that, and the role of the wife. It's really interesting discussion. And then it talks about, Hiranyaksha, how he descended and how he's creating havoc, and he pushed the earth down into the lower regions, and then how Lord Bor appeared, and it goes on for quite some time, how he's fighting with Hiranyaksha. And a very, very powerful fight. Very powerful, with clubs and carrying on like that. And then just to show his prowess at the end, when he thought, because the Devatas were getting really concerned, because the Devatas, okay, we see these residents of Jana, Tapa and Satyaloka, they're situated in the mode of goodness, so at least they can see clearly what's going on there. They may not be pure unalloyed devotees, but they're very, very purified. So they're not in any concern at all. But the devatas, the residents of the heavenly planets, they were starting to get a little bit concerned because they're fighting, and sometimes it looks like Hiranyaksha is getting the upper hand, and they're worried that the Lord's going to be defeated. And really, what it gets down to is not so worried about the Lord being defeated. It means like Hiranyaksha is going to kick us out of our planets. We're going to lose our comfortable position. Because they're actually what is called a kama mishra bhakta. They have material desires. And material desires are centered around sense enjoyment. Having a materially opulent position. And generally speaking, they're very attached to that materially opulent position. And so when it looks like their position is going to be threatened or compromised, then they go and pray to the Lord. But generally speaking, they're not so prayerful. So this helps us to see their degree of elevation in Krishna consciousness. But the residents of Jhana Satya and Tapa, they understood. They understood what was going on. They knew that because they're in this goodness, because they could see, they actually understood the position of Lord Bor. And we see that at this point, again, to demonstrate his prowess as the Supreme Person of Godhead, when he'd had enough of the fight, he just clipped him behind the ear, just like you would with a child. Hey, knock it off. You just might, not these days because you wind up in court if you do stuff like that. But when I was a child, it was very different. Your father would just give you a backhand. Hey, shut up. And that was just normal. And it was just like that. It was just like a backhand. He just clipped him behind the ear, dropped down dead, even though he'd been striking him very powerfully with his club. So again, he's showing the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Here he's manifesting as a boar and completely transcendental. When he manifests as a child, like a baby, he's able to perform wonderful activities. When he's 7 years old, he's able to lift a mountain on the little pinky of his left hand for 7 days, hold it above his head. So many, the Putana demon, Trinavarta demon, it's just a baby, just a child. Like when he killed Putana, he was still breastfeeding, he was still a toddler, he wasn't walking yet. He killed this very, very powerful demon. She was so powerful, there's a particular type of witch that can change their form to appear to be anything they like. So Putana was actually not a very attractive looking person. But then when she came to Braj and she had the mission to kill Krishna, she disguised herself as one of the gopis. She looked like a gopi, like a cowherd lady, and very, very beautiful. And even the Mother Yasoda and the other gopis thought she was some sort of goddess. She was so attractive. But Krishna saw, Supreme Person of God, he could understand what was going on, and so he just he killed her just by sucking on her breast. He sucked her life out. So these stories really, one of the points that we can gain from these stories is how God is God in any circumstance, and he's fully powerful. He possesses all potency as the Supreme Person of God in any circumstance, and he manifests whatever power he feels is necessary in whatever circumstance he finds himself to achieve a particular task. So even though he may come in the form of a boar to lift up the planet, and who can lift up a planet, really? Even Brahma, who's the most powerful living entity in this universe, when Manu asked him to lift up the planet, he was thinking about this, and I don't think I can do this. But then Lord Bor, he just manifests, comes out of his nose, which is pretty far out, then flies up in the sky, instantly expands into this gigantic elephant-like form, and then dives into the water. He dives into the water so powerfully that the ocean practically splits in two, and the ocean's offering prayers. And then he goes down and he picks up the earth on his tusk. And then Mahaprabhu describes, and another interesting point is Mahaprabhu, he describes that when he picked up the earth on a tusk, he actually impregnated Bhumi Devi, and Narakasura was born. So he also, when Krishna does things, this is Rupa Goswami talks about this in the when he's talking about the different qualities of Krishna. One of the qualities of Krishna is he's very expert. And whenever he does a single task, he achieves many different points. many different things. So he's lifting up the earth, but he's also impregnating her at the same time. And Narakasura comes as a result. And then later on he fights Narakasura. So yeah, many amazing things going on. But all through this, at least for the devotees, we see that Krishna is so amazing that any form he takes, he can perform any different pastime, many different pastimes. And he doesn't become affected, by this modes of nature, for instance, that may be affecting a tamasic creature like a hog. He doesn't become affected. So, these pastimes for the devotees are very wonderful, and for the materialists are very bewildering. And Kunti prays like that. She talks about this Maya Javanikachanam, how he's covered by his deluding potency. And especially for materialistic people, they cannot understand. They cannot understand Krishna's nature, cannot understand Krishna's potency and how Krishna manifests in these ways. Simply, and really it gets down to the main point, the main reason, okay, in the Gita it talks about Paritanaya Saranam Vinischaya Chaduskritam, things like that. But the main reason Krishna manifests for these pastimes is for the pleasure of his devotees. To interact with his devotees, to engage with his devotees, to enjoy with his devotees. It's the main reason he manifests like this. So, yeah, very wonderful pastimes. Okay. Any questions, comments? Yes, Mataji.
How do we make God relevant in people's lives who...
Sorry?
How do we make God relevant to people? I mean, they believe that it's not...
You probably know that better than I do. So there's so many ways, I guess really what it gets down to is you've got to find what works for people. And different people, different things are going to touch their heart. Because we're all individual. And God is also an individual. And an interesting thing that in the Brihat Bhagavatamrita, it mentions there, how unique God is. It's just like, when you interact with people, you have a particular way you interact, and you probably interact very much the same with most people. There's probably not a lot of variation there. But Krishna has a unique quality for every single jiva, and he interacts with every jiva differently. And there's unlimited jivas, and he's interacting with all of us differently because we're unique. So, obviously there's the holy name, it's very powerful, but sometimes you come across people who are so covered by ignorance that it just doesn't work for them, so you give them prasad. Or some people they like to read, so you give them a book. So it just depends on how to do it. But I think from my understanding, and I can't say it's from my practical experience, but from my understanding, the best way to touch people's hearts is to become pure, because then Krishna consciousness is sort of emanating from you. And I've seen this with certain personalities that they're very. I remember one time with Indradum Maharaj. When I used to go for the Polish tour every year, and I remember one year they were setting up near this lighthouse, and the guy who was in charge of the lighthouse, he managed the whole area. And the devotees had got permission from the local council to do the program there, but they hadn't sought permission from the lighthouse keeper. So we're setting up the stage, all the speakers, the sound system, we're doing the sound check and all that sort of stuff. The lighthouse keeper comes over and says, "What are you doing?" And so the devotees explained. He said, "No, you can't do that here. I'm in charge of this area." So basically he's shut the whole program down. So I get on the phone, I ring into Maharaj and say, "This is what's going on." He comes over and he starts to talk to this guy. And so they walk off with a translator, go to the lighthouse, and he says to him, it's a bit of a story, but it was kind of interesting the way he did it. He said, "Yeah, my father was a lighthouse keeper. Nobody knows what it's like. It's so lonely sometimes in the lighthouse." And just because of the way he was speaking to this guy and kind of connecting with him, the guy was touched. And he said, "I like you. You can have your program here." So the thing is like to try to find out, and usually the thing that people like the most, that what their favorite topic is? Themselves. Yeah. So don't talk to them about, you or Krishna consciousness. Talk about themselves. Talk about them. And immediately they're going to be interested because you're talking about their favorite topic. Yeah. So you just, talk about them and get to know them a bit better. And that way they'll be more open to what you might want to speak to them about. Yeah? Prabhu? Yeah.
So what sort of impurities that Father was trying to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what he exactly meant, because he says there's so many material impurities, so many. I mean, I would think, gosh, what's going on down here then? If they've got so many material impurities, we've got unlimited material impurities. So it would be more subtle kind of impurities. Because they're great sages, so that it may be. I mean, I can't really give a definitive answer on that because I haven't read anything. I haven't come across anything that the acharyas say on that. But it would be more related to very subtle things, and possibly related to their yogic prowess and things like that. It'd be more subtle, the impurities. They wouldn't be gross material impurities like we experience here. It may be, things like because they're great transcendentalists, that they have some attachment to that position. And you see, that there are many great personalities in the universe, very, very powerful personalities, but they still have some types of subtle impurities. Whereas devotees of, like a pure unalloyed devotee of Krishna, the only thing in their heart is to serve Krishna, to please Krishna. They don't have anything else in their heart, and therefore they have no Krishna bhakta niskama ata eva shanta bhukta mukti siddhikami sakare shanta. The Krishna bhakta, because he's got no material desire. He doesn't want anything but the bhuktis, the muktis, the siddhis, because these people are like siddhis. They've achieved material perfection, but still, he says, bhukti mukti siddhikami. They're still lusty because they're after something materially. Therefore, ata eva shanta. They can never be peaceful. But he says, Krishna bhakti niska ata eva shanta. Certainly they're peaceful because their only interest is to please Krishna. Even though they're very very refined, very much in the mode of goodness, still there's something subtle there. And it's kind of interesting, Prabhupada said, so many material impurities. Yeah. But he doesn't elaborate. Yeah? Haribol. Shai Vaishnav. I can't quite hear you over the fans. Yeah. The process of bhakti. The process of bhakti, that's all it's about. It's this chaitotapana marjana bhava. It's about cleansing the heart. And of course, that there are things, okay, you follow the process of bhakti, you chant the holy names, you study the shastra, you associate with devotees, you take Krishna prasad. These are very powerful things, but also we need to be analysing ourselves and looking at ourselves and looking at areas where I can be more focused to overcome the different anarthas. And of course, it's always good we see that Rupa Goswami's Dadati Pratikini Guyamakiti Prichati. He talks about this Guyamakiti Prichati, where you reveal your mind to advanced devotees and inquire submissively from them, because it's really hard for us to get a clear understanding of our anarthas. Because half the time we don't even know what an anartha is. We may have these glaring, what is glaring to other